their face, you better disappear. The fire's in their eyes and their words are really clear. So beat it, just beat it. You better run, you better do what you can. Don't wanna see no blood, don't be a macho man. You wanna be tough, better do what you can. So beat it, but you wanna be fair.
Welcome to the first movie of the series Pride of Ferals. This one is about damage. In my experience and from the impression of how successful those views on Skillcapped are, I think I'm safe to say that most people are very interested in how to deal damage, especially burst damage. For that reason I will start the series with damage dealing guides, and because in fact it is the first question you ask yourself when you start playing a damage dealing class. How do I score kills? You're not worrying about crowd control or communication, you don't care about your interface and macros, you just want to know how you can deal a lot of damage. It's a question most beginners concern themselves with because the mechanics of the game is not as interesting as to get to know how you can kill players. And it seems not to make much sense to improve anything else before you know that. And only then you will go on asking about other things. And it makes perfect sense to me, so I figured why not start with something simple. Not that dealing damage as a feral is easy, because it really is not, at least not at the moment. We can barely keep up with 50% of a warrior's damage over a longer period of time. No, the reason why I say we are going to start with something simple is because we will not go into detail just yet. This movie will be a rather superficial introduction to a feral's damage mechanics. We will deepen that knowledge of what we are going to learn here in the 5th and 6th movie. That's where we will see a feral's role in the context of an arena match instead of just remaining superficial. I always kind of feel like something's missing when I only get to see a class's damage demonstration on a dummy. While it may have advantages to isolate, for example, the damage dealing aspect from its actual interaction with and against other players and not in a staged scene, it fails to deliver on the promise of helping you to compare yourself with what is demonstrated, because dealing damage to a dummy or a healer, who is essentially nothing else than a dummy, is something you won't ever see in the arena. You won't have to face a dummy. I understand that it's for the sake of demonstration and the same rotation may apply to a real situation in the arena. Still, in the arena there is so much more happening. Dealing damage, seeing, talking to your mates, surviving, watching hostile casts, etc. I think that for the sake of being able to identify with that situation helps you more than watching a burst rotation taken out of context. Let's be honest, we're not repeating 1, 2, 3 every game. Different game, different strategy, different reactions and a different outcome. You can't apply a simple rotation from a dummy to every possible situation in the arena. Having said that, we will still get to see things outside of the arena. You know, I will have to mix things up because I don't have enough footage for everything I need to talk about. You may or may not have watched the promotional movie for the series, however you may want to have a look at it in case you didn't, because I'm relying on a concept I introduced in that promo. That concept is basically me trying to indicate how difficult certain things are to perform. If something what I marked as difficult gave you a hard time, you will appreciate how much goes into mastering it. Not every aspect of the feral is equally difficult to learn and perform, and while some things may be easy to learn, they are not as easy to master. Ha 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 ha. Yeah, I know. As if it's hard to play a feral, right? I'm very well aware of how ridiculously overpowered they were in the last season. You know, with those trance stunts and shit. But that's gone. And so is instant cyclone. And 400k heals. It's all gone. This current season is undoubtedly more challenging in playing feral than last season. Nobody needed a guide back then. Now? Well, it's either a guide they need or they just reroll to warrior. Ah, same old, same old. Let us organize our knowledge a little. I will classify all damage related spells in 4 categories: compound generators, finishers, enhancements and utilities. You may want to say, hey, don't make a big thing out of dealing damage as a feral, it's trivial, duh, I'm just dealing damage. But it's not. At different times you're focusing on different things and you can't just walk into the arena and pop berserk. You're not a warrior, your damage needs time to ramp up. All spells award 1 combat point. If it's a critical strike, it will award 2 combat points due to the passive talent Primal Fury, except for Pounce, because it cannot critically hit, and it will always give you only 1 combat point. Mangle and Shred are your main abilities for building up command points. The difference between them is the amount of energy needed and the fact that Shred deals an additional 20% on targets that are affected by bleeds, which makes it your preferable attack in situations when you want to deal damage, but otherwise you can just spam Mangle if it's for building up command points and you're not aiming at dealing damage just yet. As for Ravage, this is the spell that deals the highest damage besides Ferocious Bite. There are only two ways how to use it. One is that you use it every 30 seconds thanks to the 4-piece bonus where you needn't be stealth and behind the target, and the other is that you spam it while in incarnation form. I don't recommend using it as an opener while in stealth because you have a free Ravage anyway, which would be consumed. If it's on cooldown and you manage to be in stealth, you may want to use Ravage instead of Pounce, but that depends on the situation. Would the stun be a full duration, a half duration, what's the HP of your target, etc. The important thing about Ravage is that it's the most powerful damage spell of a Pharaoh. It is kinda sad considering how much effort you invest every time, Savage Draw, Bleeds, gaining command points again, only to realize that of all spells, Ravage deals the highest damage. Except for when Ferocious Bite hits critically. Why can't Ferocious Bite always be a critical strike? That would be awesome. Pounce. Pounce itself may not be a potent damaging spell with its low bleed effect, which is not even significant enough to mention, but it is important to mention that Pounce generates a command point, and command points eventually contribute to damage through the use of finishes which in turn consume them. Bear in mind that you will always apply the bleeding effect with Pounce onto your target, so you may not want to use Pounce as a CC on healers when you are playing, say, Jungle Cleave. It could potentially destroy your mate's control, so take care. Usually you use the spell as an opener while in stealth. That's the only way how to use it except for when you have incarnation. Then you may use Pounce outside of stealth and generate a command point. During your offensive cooldown phases it may be an alternative stun for maim, so you get to keep your command points for whatever finisher you so desire. Pounce rather is a controlling than a damaging spell, but it does count toward the total sum of command points, which also makes it a command point generator. Rake is your cheap and strong bleed effect. The sustained damage from its ticks, which occur once every 3 seconds, can be compared to about a 3 command point rip. Rake is one of your 2 bleeds, and as such it is a reliable damage source that you should always make use of. Make sure to keep up Rake when you want to pressure or kill. Swipe is a fairly rarely used ability in Arena, because it costs more than it deals damage. The Feral is a single target damage dealer in PvP. Swipe is an AoE spell. The only time when I'm using Swipe is against rogue teams when they are in AoE stealth, if I happen to see them, and against priests maybe when they use Spectral Guys, but it's really very expensive considering the 45 energy it costs. A good thing to know about Swipe though is that it generates a command point on your current target, and after that you can target a different one, use Swipe, and it won't override the command points you already have on your first swipe target. If the first target is hit by successive swipes, even if it's not your current target, you will generate additional command points on that first target. It might be good to know that you're not losing all your precious command points to a Spectral Guise. You will lose them, however, if you directly attack it with any of the other command point generating spells. What would you do with all your command points if you couldn't spend them, right? Finishers help you to get rid of all your existing command points on the targets, and we have a grand total of 4 finishers. Rip is your second bleed effect that takes once every 2 seconds and is best enjoyed with 5 command points and in combination with Rake. You can extend the duration of Rip by 2 seconds with Mangle, Shred or Ravage up to a total of 6 seconds. Your both bleeds, Rip and Rake, are very important for your damage, and they are reliable in the sense that once applied they will deal consistent damage regardless of you being controlled or not. Of course there are things like Bubble or Hand of Protection that takes them all off, but not all classes can counter your bleeds. Ferocious Bite used to be the direct damage source of a Pharaoh. Well, at least back in Cataclysm. Having preferably 5 command points and 50 energy enables you to deal twice as much damage compared to how much you would deal with only 25 energy. Besides having an additional 25% chance to critically hit with Ferocious Bites on a bleeding target, there is another thing you should know about. You shouldn't randomly spam it when you are low on energy, say below 25, just so you can get it off. Here is the reason why. A Ferocious Bite with 5 command points and only 25 energy deals less damage than a Ferocious Bite with 3 command points and 50 energy. What that means is that you should always try to have 50 energy at least for a bite. Don't mind the command points, watch out for your energy. It is a huge energy dump though, so you might want to be careful not to spam Ferocious Bite every few command points, or use it at the wrong time. Ferocious Bite is a spell which, if used correctly, can scare people into using defensive cooldowns, or right away kill them if they are on low HP already. In case you have a clear casting proc, it will only be applied to the cost of Ferocious Bite, which will be reduced to 0, it's free. But an additional 25 energy will be withdrawn for the 100% extra damage. In case you have Berserk up, it will reduce the cost of Ferocious Bite to 12 energy, but again, it will still cost you another 25 for the extra damage. Sometimes in either case, clear casting proc or Berserk, the additional energy cost of Ferocious Bite is less than 25 energy. I don't know why, and I will maybe release a movie on Warcraft movies that addresses bugs that I found, but we will not talk about them here. I will let you know when I do release that movie on Warcraft movies. You can check it out then. Maim. Feral's command point stun. Many Ferals aren't using it, and I don't know why. Stunning is so essential to your damage, not because of little damage Maim itself deals, but because of having your target in place and not being able to avoid your attacks. In theory, the highest amount of damage you could deal in a short period of time is a combination of bleeds, 1 or 2 stuns, and spamming Shred or Ravage until you can Ferocious Bite. Maybe, sometimes you're better off not using Ferocious Bite. Anyhow, what I want to say is that the priority is Savage Roar, then bleeds, and only then the stuns, because we have learned that bleeds need to go first and before stuns in order to deal high damage. The truth is, there are situations where you want to prefer stuns over bleeds. A simple illustration is Feral versus Feral. If you are threatened with bleeds and a possible CC on your healer, you are still free to move, kite away, maybe even control the opponent for that CC duration. The crucial point here is that you can avoid taking more damage, but if you stun first and then apply your bleeds, you gained a few seconds of extra uptime that could not be avoided, and maybe even has to be trinketed or otherwise compensated. Although Savage Roar deals no damage itself, it is the most important finisher. Sadly, your damage is not going to be enough to score a kill without this 40% damage buff. Personally, I really dislike having to buff Savage Roar every time. It's so annoying to waste command points and energy to a buff, without which I wouldn't be able to deal any damage. But there is something that alleviates that pain. The Savage Roar glyph, with which you can use Savage Roar without any command point for a 12 seconds duration. Except that it's not always 12 seconds. Sometimes when you rebuff Savage Roar you get 15 seconds. Or 14. It's random. Bottom line, having to buff Savage Roar is painful enough. Having to rebuff Savage Roar is even worse. There are times when you are rolling, and then the next instant, you're not. Savage Roar has fallen off. Question is, how do you proceed in that case when you notice a short Savage Roar duration, but you have a lot of damage going on? Rebuffing Savage Roar means you lose all command points. A Ferocious Bite could have been better, maybe. But what if that Ferocious Bite would not suffice? Then the Savage Roar would have been the way to go. You get the idea, it's a pain. I can't answer that question properly because obviously it depends on whether or not you can critically hit and kill, and if not, then rebuffing Savage Roar was the right choice. Probably. A Feral does not have too many enhancements in the sense of damage increasing mechanics. Savage Roar and Tiger's Fury are the only two spells to increase the damage, and they increase both the direct and the bleed damage. Apart from this, there is only agility procs such as Dancing Steel or the PvP trinket that increase a Feral's damage. But since you can't influence the time when those procs become active, they're not reliable sources. They just happen to proc, and if you happen to be dealing damage at that particular time, then you're lucky. The only time when you can actually rely on procs is after a longer period of time of not engaging in melee combat. Then the chance to proc increases and it becomes highly likely that you will have your agility procs in the first few seconds of combat. Besides Savage Roar, there is only one other spell that increases a Feral's damage, and that's Tiger's Fury. And being able to increase damage only once every 30 seconds makes Tiger's Fury even more important. It's active for only 6 seconds, increases damage during that time by 15%, additionally yields 60 energy and is not on a global cooldown, which is why a very good use of Tiger's Fury would be when switching onto a different target. If somebody asks you whether or not you could switch, your answer depends on whether or not Tiger's Fury is on cooldown. If it's not, your opponent has to prepare for a potentially deadly switch, a hard switch as I call it. But confusingly, although you are switching to kill, the cooldowns used for that hard switch are soft cooldowns. It's only Tiger's Fury, and maybe a trinket proc, or a dancing steel proc, possibly an engineering enchant. But it's not your major 3-minute berserk and incarnation cooldown. If Tiger's Fury is on cooldown, a switch might still be possible with enough energy, a soft switch in my terminology, but unlike a hard switch, it's not deadly. It might be threatening if your mate has enough pressure going, but from your point of view it's like a cat purring at a mad dog. Very scary. You can easily macro Tiger's Fury with Ravage since it's on the same cooldown. That way you won't forget to use Ravage, and at the same time you won't waste Tiger's Fury on the last global cooldown too much, because you could use Tiger's Fury whenever, but only profit from it in the next global cooldown. You can apply enhanced bleed effects with Tiger's Fury with the so-called best bleeds, especially when switching onto different targets. If and only if you happen to be rolling deep with Savage Roar up, bleeds up and getting 5 command points again, when Tiger's Fury becomes ready, then you may use it as a combination. The reason why I else don't recommend to use them together is because it's a huge energy dump, and because bleeds usually go first. Except maybe when damaging mages that they seem very crispy. You could ignore bleeds once in a while, when you know he's going to block soon anyway. Utilities are spells that don't deal any damage themselves, but enable you to do something that you wouldn't have been able to do without them. Berserk as the major offensive cooldown sure is one of them. Incarnation, which makes us look very cool, is another spell that is very important to our burst damage. And finally, Nature's Vigil, which is essentially a leftover because we can't really take half wild unless our mediocre damage is compensated with a class that actually deals real damage, like Avoria, maybe, but I don't know, it's just a guess. Here is what many people like to confuse about Ferals when they pop Incarnation.
Zieht alles, zieht Swifty. Hat Swifty an.
Yeah, well, the truth is, Berserk is your damage cooldown, not Incarnation. Without Berserk, Incarnation is worthless when you want to deal damage, because Ravage and Pounce cost too much. The only thing Incarnation allows you is to be able to use spells that would otherwise require stealth or being out of combat. Berserk, however, is the spell that reduces your energy cost on all spells by 50%. But the damage is not increased per se. You are still dealing the same damage, but now you are able to use twice as many spells before you go out of energy. Since you only have 15 seconds of reduced energy cost, you don't want to spend a second being idle. And that includes waiting for defensive cooldowns such as pain suppression to wear off. During Berserk you don't wait. You spam whatever you have, be it Ravage while in Incarnation form, or simply shred and mangle. But be careful with Ferocious Bite. Even in Berserk it's still a huge energy dump. So many players use Gladiator Lossa, and I don't blame them. Playing with this add-on has the great advantage of focusing on both visual and auditory perception, but it can be disadvantageous when it tells you that Incarnation has been popped, and you misleadingly assume that the heavy cooldowns are active, which you have to kite or compensate otherwise. But as I said earlier, Berserk is your offensive cooldown, not Incarnation. Without Berserk, a Feral won't be able to deal much damage. But as long as people confuse that, you can use Incarnation earlier than you normally would, in order to scare your opponents into controlling you or whatnot. Incarnation is active for twice as long as Berserk. There is enough time to fake an offensive kill attempt. This is just a very minor, super pedantic bagatelle of mine. It's very comfortable to bind Incarnation together with Berserk, your trinket, and maybe your racial and engineering glove effect, all in one macro, so you can use everything with only one click. Here is the downside. All offensive spells are free for global cooldown except for Incarnation. If you use Incarnation with Berserk, there is 1 second of Berserk that is wasted in this global cooldown of Incarnation. You would only have 14 effective seconds of Berserk instead of 15. But you know, Mr. Pandaria is not popular for its fine-tuning. The talent Nature's Vigil is not what I would call a good choice. A Feral in PvP only has 2 possibilities. He can either go with Heart of the Wild or with Nature's Vigil. The problem is that we don't really have a choice. The talent we choose completely depends on whether we have enough damage on board as a team. If we do, we can go Heart of the Wild and contribute with a longer lifespan, but when we don't have enough damage, and a Feral alone certainly is not a very strong damage dealer when I compare them with Warriors, for example, then we need to go with Nature's Vigil. 12% more damage, plus we also get to heal a little. Yay! Now, before we come to an end, there are a few more things I'd like to mention. Many people asked me if disarming a Feral would make sense. Many have told me that it does, and many have witnessed that it doesn't. The thing is, disarming affects only spells that rely on weapon damage. Mangle, Shred, Ravage, those are spells that would be severely reduced in their damage output, but you would still be able to use them since you are in Cat, and you actually do not actively use a weapon, so it's not like disarming a warrior, who can't use spells anymore. A Feral is still capable of using all his spells, but some are reduced in their damage. Rip, Rake and Ferocious Bite do not rely on weapon damage. Their source for damage is agility or attack power, I'm not sure which. But the point is, even when you are disarmed, you can kill someone. Another thing that really annoys me is the loss of all combo points and the energy used for that spell when you hit something like an ice block or bubble. It's all gone. Hate it. A similar thing can happen when your target is intervened. The next melee attack is redirected to the warrior, and if you happen to use a combo point generating spell, you will lose all your combo points on your current target and instead gain 1 or 2 combo points on the warrior. Great. Hate it. When mages use Temporal Shield, you might not want to damage into it. Just wait, let it drop off, go back in. Except when maybe the mage is already too low on HP. You know, use your own judgment. Restoration Shamans have that very skilled passive talent that increases their max HP by 25%. Is that of any interest to a Feral? Yes, sadly. When below 25% HP, a Ferocious Bite will refresh Rip to its full duration of 16 seconds. Sometimes you want that to be refreshed without having to do it yourself. Gaining combo points, using Rip, it all costs time and energy that you don't have. So a Ferocious Bite below 25% is actually quite nice. But if you misjudge how much HP is left and use Ferocious Bite above 25%, you're pretty much screwed up. Because now you don't have a full duration of Rip on your target. You don't have any energy left. Probably you don't even have a lot of Savage Roar left. And worst case scenario, after the bold Ferocious Bite, your target is not low on HP at all. Hate it. Basically you can think of a Feral as a mixed class of both direct and damage over time. But you need to combine both in order to achieve the highest damage output. But you don't always need bleeds in order to kill someone. You can kill someone with direct damage only. You cannot kill someone bleed damage only. With bleeds you need to follow up with additional direct damage. Alright guys, this is it for the damage part of the series. Check back for Control next week. My favorite, probably the best of all aspects, but that's just me. See you again soon.